Hey, DM Scotty here. Welcome to the DM's Craft. Glad you could join us again. Doing something a little different this time. I wanted to do some transportation for the player characters, and this is something I did for one of my adventures. I'll do a little setup. I had an adventure that the players were on where this contaminated magic had grown this crocodile to giant proportions, and the local fishermen were terrified. So they enlisted the player characters to help, and it made for an interesting encounter because the fishermen took them out on their skiffs, on their boats. So they weren't standing on solid ground to fight this thing. So they had to try to maneuver in boats and use some water walking powers and that kind of thing. So it really kind of mixed things up and made it interesting. So that's kind of the setup, and I want to show you how to make a boat for your games, and we'll get right to it. So here is the fleet of 3 skiffs that I was talking about. As you can see, I've got a ram on the front, got a nice sail. I put a little seat in there. I got a rudder on the back. And when I turn it around, you can kind of see the mast is just an L shape. And that's kind of what it looks like completed. And I wanted to just give you an idea what we'd be making. So we'll move to the construction from here. So here I have my cardstock. And what I'm going to do is make the pattern for the boat. So what I'm going to do is the classic trick with the snowflake. I'm going to fold it in half, so when I cut it out I'll have the same image on both sides. So I'll put that down. And I decided I want the boat to be 6 inches long, so I will mark with the ruler. And I'm going to do, I didn't want to have it 2 inches wide, that might be too wide, so I'm going to do 1.5 wide. So I'll just measure that out just so I kind of know the dimension. So there's the dimension. So what I'm going to do now is I'll draw out the boat. So the shape of the boat. So I'll kind of go through there. I'm just freehanding it, and I just use the marks as a guide to like how big I want the boat. So there's the shape of the boat I'm looking at. So right there, and as you can see there's not on that side, but when I cut it out it'll mirror itself. So let's cut that out. Okay, so we got that all cut out, and then when I open it up I got the shape of my boat. And I will use that as a template to cut the cardboard out for the boat and the top of the boat. Okay, so I've got my cardboard box and I've got my pattern, and basically I want to do this twice because there's the bottom deck and then I have the edge around the top deck that looks like the hull of the boat. So I'll just put this down and trace around it. So tracing the second. And there, so I've got two parts of the boat. I'll cut both those out and then we'll proceed to the next step. Now before I cut that out, I am going to do one more thing. One of these will be the bottom of the boat, and one of them will be the top deck. It will look like the sides of the boat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw that in. So what I'll do is I'll do back here, and then I'll do some of the front. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw an edge of the boat. Not an exact science. So there we go. I've got the, so this part will be cut out. Then this ring will go on top of this one, and it'll look like the edges of the boat. So what we want to do first is cut this out, because if you cut this out first and then cut this out, it'll be a lot harder to cut this one out. So we'll cut the center out first, and then we'll cut the outside. So now we'll just cut these out and move on from there. So now we remove that center, and we'll cut the outer edge off, and it'll be a lot easier to cut out than cutting the center out second. So now with my glue gun, I'm going to glue the hull together. So I'll take this piece off, grab my glue gun, carefully set it down. So there we go, the two halves are together. I got a little string on there. Sometimes you get that glue gun string. A little piece, just rip that off. And there we go. We got the hull all set to go. And we'll move to the next step. So here we go. I've got my embellishments for the skiff here. I've got a seat that I'm going to put in there. And it's a thicker cardstock. I've got the rudder. It's going to be in two pieces. I'll glue that together. And then in my scenario, I had a ram on the front of the boat. So I'll glue that on the front. So first I'm going to do the seat. So I'll just take the seat and grab the glue gun, and then I'm going to put it about in the center of the boat. So there you can see it's in the boat. So now I'm going to do the rudder. So I'll take the rudder piece, and I'm going to glue the underside of the rudder. So I'll put a little glue there. Glue that on. So now you can see what I've got going on there. So now I will glue it to the boat. So I'll grab my glue gun, put it here. So now I've got that rudder going on. You can see that. Okay. Now I have the ram left. I'm not going to put that on yet because I want to do a little bit of embellishment to the ram, and we'll go from there. Okay, so here's my ram, and this is just a piece of thin cardstock, thinner than I use for the seat, and I'm going to just put it on there, and I'm going to trace around it. Okay, so I've got the outline there. So now I'll cut that out. So I want this to be like a steel-tipped ram or iron-tipped ram. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it there, and I'm going to glue it on the ram, and then I'm going to cut a couple straps. Okay, so now I'll glue those on. So now I've got my ram finished. I glued the pieces of cardstock on the ram, and I'm going to make it look like the ram is iron bound or steel bound when I paint it up. So now I'll glue that on the front of the boat. So I'll just put some hot glue there and stick it right on. So now we've got our ram on the front of the boat, and we've got our seat. and we have our rudder. So we are set for the next phase, and now we'll move on to the mast. Okay, so I've got, you can see here I've got 2 basswood sticks. You could use balsa wood also. One is smaller than the other. What I'm going to do is put them like this to make the mast. I got to cut them though. So this one's about a 1/4 of an inch wide, and this one's about 1 centimeter wide. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the mast about 4 inches tall. So I will just mark that like that, and I'm going to make this jig coming out about 3 inches. So this will be coming out of here, and I'll cut there and I'll cut there. So then I'll put the sail on the mast. So let's go ahead and cut those. So right here I have a little miter box. I also have a blade that I use to cut this, but you could use just a small saw, or you could use a Dremel tool would be perfect. So I'm going to use this box to cut it. So I'll put it in there, and I'll just line it up to the straight cut and put my saw in there. My wood cut's really easy, and voila, I've got my cut. So there we go. And now I'll cut the smaller part of the mast. And there we go. We have both pieces. So now I'm ready to assemble the mast. Now before you assemble those, you'll probably want to sand them, so I just have this little sander here that I can use to sand it. But one other thing I like to do is put a little angle on the end of each tip, and you can just use the miter box at the 45-degree angle and cut off. So I have that already done, and so I'll show you the 2 pieces, and they'll go like this. Now you can kind of see the angle there, and I'll hold it up closer so you can see that it's angled there at the top, and I've just sanded off a little bit, and I did the same with the shorter piece, the bottom piece. So now I'll just glue those together, and we will have our mast. So there we go, we got our mast. Hey, DM Scotty here. We will continue with this boat tutorial in part 2 of this episode 4. And I'm sorry if I've butchered any nautical terms. I'm definitely not an expert on boats, so I was just trying to describe the boat. So we will continue in the next video. See you then.